Українське незалежне радіо.
Joining me today on Ukraine Watch from Ukraine's capital city, Kyiv, is Taras Berezovets, a political analyst and television host on Ukraine's Підтримай канал. He is the host of that channel's information and current affairs program, Spets-Tema, and co-host of the international affairs evening talk show, The Week. Thank you for being here, Taras.
Yeah, good to be with you, Dan.
I'm speaking with you today after last week when White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan urged Americans to leave Ukraine immediately, stating that Russia could potentially invade any day now. Yet I anticipate you are striving to carry on with your professional commitments, including a planned trip this week to the Munich Security Conference. Some of our viewers may recall that it was this very conference 15 years ago when Vladimir Putin gave his now infamous speech criticizing US-led military intervention around the world and warning the West that he saw NATO expansion as a serious provocation to Russia. He's now repeating that warning with the massive buildup of Russian troops near Ukraine's border. Ukrainian officials, for their part, are urging people to remain calm. Taras, what's your take on the messaging from Ukraine's current administration?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Dan. I think that Munich is a very specific place both for Vladimir Putin and the world, because you're absolutely right, reminding that at one point Vladimir Putin was delivering his infamous speech about Ukraine and other former Soviet republics. And as we know, in his off-record conversation with Western leaders, he already said that Ukraine is not even a state, and I'm quoting Vladimir Putin here, and the majority of its territories, including Crimea, Donbass, belong to us, belong to Russia. That's what he said. Then he was a prime minister of Russia. We remember this special operation, typically for KGB. Then he replaced himself with Dmitry Medvedev, who was for just one term Russian president, and then after that Vladimir Putin returned again to his job as Russian president. I think then that gap between statements of Western leaders and Ukrainian leaders is very clear for us, because majority of Ukrainians, they have relatives, friends living overseas. Ukraine is one of those nations which is widespread. The Ukrainians living on every continent now, Northern America, Southern America, Africa, Asia, Europe, everywhere. And of course, then people listen to statements of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who says, stay calm, everything is under control. And this is also his quote. And then they hear news, for instance, from CNN, BBC, CBS, and other media. They feel some misunderstanding, because something which President Zelensky calls hysteria of Western media, it doesn't coincide completely with information from reliable Western sources. A lot of Ukrainians now read in translation or in original American and British papers, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, and others, and they see statements of American or British intelligence. They listen to briefings of Jen Psaki or John Kirby, press secretary of Pentagon. And then they hear that there is a clear and present danger from Vladimir Putin's regime, and Vladimir Putin can invade any day now. And on the contrary, they listen to Vladimir Zelensky and briefings of Ukrainian national security, who say there's no danger, stay calm, or like President Zelensky said a couple of weeks ago, we have a shashlik party ahead of us. It's like a Ukrainian analog for barbecue party. There's no rush. We are looking for Easter holidays, just warm summer and everything. So everything should be under control. And on the contrary, when we hear these statements by Western leaders that Putin's invasion seems to be imminent, this creates complete misunderstanding. This completes exactly I would say lack of trust in Ukrainian government. That's exactly what happens. And especially not to mention the fact that according to many Ukrainian media, well, as we heard more than 20 jets with Ukrainian tycoons and their families already left Ukraine during this weekend. And one of these jets actually took President Zelensky family as well, because Ukrainian media wrote that First Lady and the kids of President, they left to Italy for their luxurious visa at Lake Como. And it sounds very weird, I would say, for us to hear these statements by, like I said already, Ukrainian government and Western governments, which completely do not coincide in their analysis.
Do you think the United States and the UK calling out what they see as a possible imminent threat of Vladimir Putin ordering a new invasion of Ukraine is having any influence on the Kremlin's calculation?
I think so, Dan. I think, one important point. I think what Biden's administration and, for instance, British government and our Western governments are doing these days, they want to deter Vladimir Putin. They want to de-escalate the situation. And saying exactly about the plans of Vladimir Putin, they give some uncertainty to him. They give him impression, and I think this impression is very clear, that there are Western intelligence moves in Kremlin now. And what we read from Western papers, Putin is very much preoccupied. He really believes that there are a lot of Western modes working very close to him. And this could be true, because at one point, we remember there was a huge scandal in Kremlin like 2 or 3 years ago. Then one interpreter who worked for one very close ideas of Vladimir Putin, he was American spy who actually luckily escaped before he was arrested by Russian law enforcement. And from this perspective, what President Biden and Boris Johnson are doing, depicting Putin plans, for instance, they say it about false flag operation, then they say that Putin is going to install a pro-Kremlin government with Russian puppets like Yevgeny Murayev, former MP. I think it sounds to many Ukrainians and to people in the West very trustful. I would say these sources sounds very reliable, and which means effectively that by just giving light to these plans, I think Western governments are doing a very good job for us, because they every time give Vladimir Putin impression that his every plan is already known to the West. And I think unless they did it previously, he might have already invaded Ukraine. And the reason why he's not invading, he's very uncertain about how many his plans are already known to Western intelligence.
You made some comments earlier surrounding Ukrainian civil society. You were interviewed recently on CBS News, where you described this current conflict between Vladimir Putin and the West as a conflict of civilizations, one of the free world and the world of tyranny. And you described Ukraine as being part of the West. Now, Ukraine's democracy, albeit imperfect, has certainly been moving westward since the fall of the Soviet Union. Do you see Ukrainian civil society firmly in the Western camp?
Well, absolutely. And the polls made, in Ukraine, they confirmed this opinion. Majority of not only opinion makers, but majority of Ukrainians are completely in favor of Ukraine being a part of NATO and European Union. And then I'm saying about clash of civilizations, I mean, of course, there's a clear division lines now in Europe. Ukraine is definitely a part of Western civilization. This is absolutely clear, not only to me, but to majority of Ukrainians as well. And if we're talking about our side, if we're talking about Russia and communist China, they're on other side of this clash of civilizations. And quite unfortunately, I think that Vladimir Putin, he miscalculated at some point the situation in Ukraine, because he still, and his interviews give clear impression that for Vladimir Putin, Ukrainian nation, he says, is a part of Russian civilization. He said it many times, if you speak Russian, it means effectively you consider yourself as a part of Rossiyski Svet, Russian world. He thinks that anyone Russian-speaking person living whatever in Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, or Kazakhstan, should be considered as a Russian, not ethnical Russian in a sense, but as a Russian, I mean, just someone who accepts the idea of this Russian world. And from this perspective, I would say that absolutely majority of Ukrainians were making absolutely aware choice 2014 during the Revolution of Dignity and the later Russian-Ukrainian War for Independence. And I would say that many Ukrainian experts, politicians, and opinion makers, they consider this war as already third war for Ukrainian independence, making clear that the first war of independence was done during Hetman Mazepa time. Second was after collapse of Russian Empire after the end of World War I. And now we see really the third war of independence, because 30 years ago, to put it bluntly, in 1991, the fact what we got independence, we did not become independent in a full sense of this word. This is exactly the time then Ukraine became independent from Russia, and this fact scares Mr. Putin. It scares not only him but Russian elite as well.
You work for a TV channel that often features opinions of people critical of Ukraine's current president, Volodymyr Zelensky. Do you have any serious concerns about the state of journalistic freedom in your country?
It's another good question, Dan. I would say the situation of freedom of speech is not that critical like it used to be in Viktor Yanukovych's time, but still there are a lot of some dangerous signs which reflect point of view of Volodymyr Zelensky and people around him. For instance, Підтримай TV channel has been checked by law enforcement, I think, already five times by now. And for instance, during the last weekend, famous Ukrainian research journalist and investigator Mikhailo Tkach and his team were severely beaten in the city of Dnipro because they were trying to film private jets arriving at birthday party of notorious Ukrainian oligarch Igor Kolomoisky. He was sanctioned by U.S. government, and the problem is that we do not see clear signs that the government was investigating these cases of attacks against journalists. And in case with, for instance, our channel TV Підтримай, we never get accreditation for international events. Then Western leaders arrive to Ukraine. For instance, each time then we're trying to send our camera and our journalist to presidential office to ask some questions, President Zelensky and, for instance, Western leaders like Boris Johnson, each time we're rejected. And the Підтримай channel is one of few TV channels which were never allowed. I think with only one exception. For 2.5 years, we were only, I think, allowed once to be on presidential press conference. All other cases, we have been rejected this right. And moreover, we see very similar signs in our parliament, in Верховна Рада, because faction of Sluga Narodu, controlled by Volodymyr Zelensky, they always change the rules of access of journalists working in a parliament, making their work difficult each time. But I would say that still, even with these problems, freedom of speech, Ukraine absolutely undisputed, and majority of Ukrainians enjoying freedom of speech, diversity of different views on TV, press, and radio. And I would say still, after many problems, in a sense, Ukraine is should be considered one as the most free countries on the space of former Soviet Union. Of course, with Baltic states with the best level of freedom of speech, but still, I would say, even considering all these problems, we are one of most democratic countries with strong democratic traditions.
Well, I certainly hope that things remain peaceful in Kyiv. Taras, thank you very much for your time. This has
My
been,
pleasure as always.
This has been Тарас Березовец, co-host of Підтримай TV's International Affairs Talk Show of the Week, a Ukrainian political analyst. I'm Dan Terlecki, and this has been another episode of Ukraine Watch.
Українське незалежне радіо.